Okay, we're with Jay Lang today. Jay is a legendary disc jockey, I guess program director too at Hampton University
General
Radio.
manager, general manager, air
Concert
personality,
promoter,
yeah.
all of that.
Yeah.
So Jay, you have you put together the Church Street Jazz series. You have one more show coming up. It's Bob James. So
Right.
tell me about that performance and why Bob James, in terms of smooth jazz, is such a legend.
Well, first of all, Bob is an icon. You know, when you say Bob James, you have to put in that same school of living legends, Stevie Wonder, Quincy Jones, of which we talk about Quincy in my interview with Bob, which you can hear on SoundCloud on my Jazzman Jay SoundCloud page. Quincy Jones was the one that gave Bob his first recording contract
How about that?
on Mercury Records, and who would have thought that would have happened back during that time when segregation was such a rampant thing all over the world. And he's a good personal friend. This will be the fourth time that I played Bob. We played him back in 2015, 2014, 2015 in the series. Kind of losing track now, but that's a wonderful thing. That means we got some good years behind us. And to end the series after coming out of COVID, which would have been season 7, but it's season 6 because we had to skip a season.
Right.
I thought it fitting to pay tribute not only to a legend, but to allow him to continue to perform and display his musical excellence. He's a genius. I mean, you go all the way back to Taxi, the television show, and everybody knows the Taxi theme, and Westchester Lady, and Heads, and Mind Games with David Sanborn. I mean, it's just so many iconic songs from this. He's 81 years old,
That's right.
but he plays like he's 25. And he's the nicest, kindest person, and I have the pleasure of calling him friend. And he never says no when I call. He's such a humble person. And matter of fact, I got that kind of like, I'm going to meet a superstar jitters, because when I was in high school, and we talk about this in an interview, I played his music in high school band.
Okay.
And I would never have thought that this legend that we were all built up to learn from in music theory, because I played trumpet, first trumpet, would end up being a close personal friend. I mean, how beautiful is that?
Yeah,
You
that's
know?
really cool. I remember growing up in an album by his called Touchdown, I believe. It
Yes.
was really popular.
Yes.
Can you talk about that album? Was that a major album in his career?
I'm trying to figure out what song was on Touchdown.
I just remember going to the record store and it was featured,
That's the one that had the football in the front. Right. That was I can't remember the year. If I could tell you the year, if I could tell you the year, then I could tell you why it was significant. But during that particular time, he was still riding off the coattails of all the other hits he had. His one album, 2, 3. He had numbers in the beginning of them.
Yeah.
And
Maybe Touchdown was 6 or 7.
Yeah, 6 or 7. And I'd have to cheat and
No, that's
get my
okay.
phone
I
and look
can
it up
research that.
to see what song it was off that album. Well, at that time, man, he was just, Columbia Records had a serious jazz roster.
Right.
You're talking Herbie Hancock was on there, Ramsey Lewis was on that jazz roster, Mongo Santa Maria was on the roster, Lonnie Liston Smith was on the roster.
He's from Norfolk?
He's from Richmond.
Richmond, huh?
And he's another close personal friend. I call him Uncle Lonnie. As a matter of fact, when I first started Church Street Jazz Series, before the Church Street Jazz Series was born, 7 venues asked me to find an artist for the 10th anniversary celebration of the reopening of the Addicts Theater.
Okay.
And I called Lonnie, and he was more than happy, because he really doesn't do many concerts.
Yeah.
And he was more than happy to come in. But Columbia at the time was, if you were a jazz artist and you were on Columbia, that was it.
Yeah.
And then Bob was doing music scores and all kinds of things back then.
Talk about the emergence of what we define today or label as smooth jazz. There was a period of what was considered the classic jazz, Thelonious Monk and just so many artists, and then smooth jazz, where some, I guess, maybe jazz snobs, older guys, sort of turn their nose up at it. But it was hugely popular. I think festivals just jam packed with people.
Yeah, yeah. So Jason and I have had some conversations about that, and I mean some healthy conversations about that, off and on, not in depth, but every time we see each other. Real jazz aficionados, because before it was smooth jazz, it was called jazz fusion.
Right.
Really, really and truly, the smooth jazz got a little popish, and Bob and I talk about that a little bit in the interview.
But pop and R&B too, right?
Yeah, it's a little pop and R&B flavored, and now it's kind of cookie cutter, which is sad, because it's all the same, the same beat.
Yeah.
You can actually take a handful of smooth jazz songs, put them together, and if you were a DJ, you can mix them all together, and it would sound.
And is
like
that because
one long
it's
song.
Electronic percussion?
Well, not so
partially,
much
or
that. What they're doing is they are recreating a sound that everybody else is making hit records from.
Okay.
It's kind of like remember electronics, when certain instruments were the thing, everybody used those instruments.
That's right.
Whenever they did whatever they needed to do.
Yep.
So to get in the depth of the answer to your question,
Yeah.
real smooth jazz aficionados, some of them are insulted by smooth jazz. To call it smooth and then jazz, like they'll say, that's not jazz.
Right.
It's not. But jazz has many different textures and forms,
Sure.
which is one of the reasons why I'm bringing Bob, because he's done all of them.
Right.
He's touched on all of them. His music has been sampled by everybody. But he's an artist. He is a artist from the Berkeley class of artists, Carnegie Hall class of artists. Jazz aficionados, you talk about McCoy Tyner, you talk about Stanley Turrentine, John Coltrane. Those are your jazz heads artists. They can get into the avant-garde jazz and the real players who actually they become the music. They don't play the music. They are the music. It's the essence of their soul that comes out of the instrument.
Right.
And that's beautiful. It can't be recreated. That's why when you heard a Coltrane song, you knew it was Coltrane.
Sure.
When you heard a McCoy Tyner song or a Lonnie Liston Smith song, you knew that's what it was. No one would have to tell you that.
Right.
Today, with smooth jazz, you hear songs on the radio, and unless you know Brian Culbertson's playing, but then there's another kid, Nicholas Cole, that sounds like Brian, that Brian took under his wing. It's kind of hard to tell them apart. But you have Gerald Albright, you can tell his saxophone playing, you can tell Najee's saxophone playing, but these two are iconic artists who studied from the masters.
Yeah.
So the traditional jazz folk are not so happy about the smooth jazz thing.
Right.
And when it was jazz fusion, you had a little, a bad itch from them too, but they accepted it because the Herbie Hancocks and Ramsey Lewis's, they morphed into it a little bit, and that's when the R&B
Stanley
flavor
Clarke,
came. Stanley Clarke, and even Norman Brown. He started out on Motown. Motown and Mo Jazz.
Yeah.
So it was okay, and it was acceptable to understand, okay, these guys have to make money, and it created something that turned into something that became more commercial than it was artsy.
Right.
And that's a sad thing to people like Bob James, and even when you talk to Herbie and some of the other real jazz heads that are still around, they're kind of like, where's the flavor? I mean, it's like serving somebody a pie that's made out of dough, just dough. No filling, no season, no anything.
It was part of that made to, you mentioned commercialization of jazz, but to appeal to a wider audience.
To appeal to a wider audience, smooth jazz was a brainchild of Alan Kempler, who's still a very good friend of mine. And when I was program director at Smooth Jazz 105.3 in Richmond, in Norfolk, Smooth Jazz 105.3 before I went to Smooth Jazz 105.9, I brought Alan in as good consultant just to kind of give me an idea as to whether or not do some, some research and focus groups to see whether or not we were on the right track. And he said we were, but he tried to get me to add Phil Collins and crossover artists, which was a ingredient of smooth jazz. It was the top 40 crossover adult artists. They called it AC at the time.
Right.
And these new smooth jazz artists. And there weren't enough iconic African American smooth jazz artists in that mix. They weren't playing Pieces of a Dream. They weren't doing Najee. They did a little Norman Brown.
Kenny G.
They weren't playing a lot.
Right.
They were doing Grover. But it was Kenny G and Brian Culbertson and Boney James. And it's like, well, what happened to Ronnie Laws? Where's Lonnie Liston Smith? How about Nancy Wilson as a vocalist?
Right.
And he wanted me to stop playing those things. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm bringing you in as a consultant, not as a dictator.
Right.
I said, these are the artists that paved the way for what's happening right now. And what's going to happen with you playing 40 top records like a top 40 station, you're going to burn the format out.
Right.
Back in the day, as programmers, when we played music, we played the single, but we couldn't wait till the album came.
Right.
And we looked for that cut on the album that was the banging cut. And we would play it as an album cut. That was a whole nother category.
Yeah.
And those were lots of times the songs that record companies would not release.
That's right.
Either because the A&R people didn't have the ears to pick the right singles, or you had an A&R person who thought, that's a killer song, let's leave it on the album to sell the album. And
Right.
hopefully radio would play it. So
That was the magic of FM radio, wasn't it?
that was the magic of FM radio.
Play anything on the album.
And that's what
Or the whole album.
That's what that's what really started to kill AM outside of the fact that the sound was so much better.
Sure.
But it gave announcers and program directors. It gave me freedom when I was program director of Magic 99 in Richmond for 11, 12 years. It gave me freedom to explore.
Yeah.
And the audience loved it because they're buying these records and they hear this stuff. And they would call and say, look, man, I know you like this cut, but have you heard these other 3 cuts? Can you play that on the radio? And because it was good music, it felt good.
Sure.
And to me, that's the key to a winning radio station. It has to flow and it has to make you feel good.
Right.
And if you put the right music together and they're marrying together in a way that you just can't turn the radio off, it becomes a part of your lifestyle. And if I become a part of your lifestyle, I'm just like your washcloth, I'm just like your breakfast and your coffee. You got to have me every day.
Let's talk real briefly, since you have a radio side to your career, an important part. It seems like a lot of jazz now is on public radio stations, sort of to preserve and continue the art form. How do you view that versus what's left of commercial jazz radio in 2022?
Well, I'm glad it's still there. As a matter of fact, on Smooth 88.1 WHOV, I have a category where I still play Carmen McRae, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan. I'll throw in some Stanley Turrentine, Lonnie Liston Smith, and Nat King Cole, Nancy Wilson, because I want this paying homage to those artists, and hopefully the people who listen to smooth jazz will listen. And it's an audio lesson of where this all came from.
What time and what day is that program?
No, that's
specifically? Just
I
generally.
sprinkle that in every hour.
Okay.
Every other hour you'll hear one of those iconic artists.
Very good.
And then every now and then during Saturday Night Live, which is our live concert series on Saturday nights, I'll reach back because I did a Coltrane concert on Saturday Night Live, the full concert from 1962. I found it. And so now I've got like 250 live concerts that I've found that I'm constantly looking for more of them to put this on the radio to expose them.
Yeah.
So back to your question, Sirius XM, hats off to them for having a traditional jazz channel. I think they have 1 or 2. And for those who are real musicians, it's like school. They have somewhere they can go and they can listen to these artists, and I'm not sure who's programming it, but they are bringing out the best of the best, the icons, and real musicians want to know that. And you can tell the difference between a real musician and somebody who's just doing a cookie cutter because their songs sound alike, and they use the same beats, and they use the same chords. It's in the same key, and they're just making money off of the cookie cut.
Sure. Yeah. It's
You know,
business.
yeah, it's just business. How much money can I make? How many people can I get to my tour? And then that's another thing that is important to me when it comes to the Church Street Jazz Series, is to bring artists and their band, not a house band, not a made-up band of great guys. So there's some great guys who can back up some great artists.
Yeah.
But when you have the band, when you have Richard Elliott and his band, Brian Culbertson won't do dates without his band. There's some artists that will not do that.
Right.
Because they don't have to tell the drummer, I'm feeling good and we're going to take this to the third level. He can
Right.
just turn around and do this. Bob his head, and the drummer already knows.
Sure.
Because that's his friend. That's his boy. I mean, they practice together.
Yeah.
Same thing with the bass player and the other musicians. There's a chemistry. It's like cream in your coffee. You know the flavor, but you got to have the right ingredients.
Yeah.
And so it costs a little more to bring the actual band that's with the artist. But to me, that's the real concert. That's not me trying to shave dollars here and there so I can walk home with a whole lot of money.
Right.
You know, I mean, I'd rather bring them in, put them in hotels a day ahead of time so they don't have to rush off the plane and run straight to sound check. That's a pet peeve of mine too. And these band members, they appreciate being able to come a day ahead of time, enjoy the pool, enjoy the restaurant, relax, get up, have some breakfast, walk around, and then have a great sound check, relax. And that's one thing that Bob said. He said, do you mind if we come in? You brought us in a day early before. I said, Bob, absolutely. And I made sure I found a hotel that had an espresso machine in it because he loves espresso and he loves French restaurants. Yeah. So that's a part of a long, complicated answer.
Yeah, no, that's good. What French restaurant is he going to?
Well, actually, there's a French restaurant in the Gaslight Hotel.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if I should be telling what hotel he's going to be in.
That's
but,
all right.
but anyway, it's a nice restaurant downtown in a great hotel that has a museum in it.
Yeah.
And I think you'll like it.
Yeah, that's very good. All right, so we're standing in front of Hampton Maritime Center, and you have a little jazz series going on here, too.
Okay.
Tell me about that one.
Initially, the Church Street Jazz Series was supposed to be, I bought the idea to Hampton. And at the time, it was very, very difficult to do anything in Hampton. There were just so much paperwork, so many hoops to jump through. I really didn't have experience at doing a series. And there was an RFP and there was money available, and I got led to believe I had a good chance of getting that money, only to find out they gave it to somebody else, promised of doing some long-term things, and they really got a one-shot deal in the money.
Right.
So in talking further, it just was a laboring process which didn't make any sense. And since I'd already done something with Norfolk, I said, look, the Addicts Theater's just sitting there. What if I can breathe life back into this city, into this theater, which was actually the original. The Apollo was not the first black theater. It was the Addicts. And I think it was it was 1919. But it was just a couple of years before the Apollo became the Apollo as we know it. When the Addicts Theater was built, all of those artists who were going to the Apollo, the Nat King Coles, James Browns, Bill Bojangles Robinson, Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, Nancy Wilson, they were coming here. And then it was like 2 or 3 years later, the Apollo, which was a burlesque theater, switched over to an entertainment venue in New York. And because it was New York, it got all the shine, and Norfolk didn't.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, Rob Henson and John Ramstein at 7 Venues said, listen, if you think you can do something in there, how about we give you a budget, and we'll hold your hand and walk you through this, and you can have that theater to bring some life into it. Well, now here we are still doing it.
Yeah.
And then as we move further, he said, well, how about graduating to the Harrison? Because it's kind of sitting there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. I was a little shot it at in the beginning, because I'm like, okay, I'm going from a 500 seat theater to a 1,500 seat theater, but that was one of the best decisions I could have done.
Okay.
And there's a plan for a separate series for the Harrison as well.
Sure.
So I say all of that to say this didn't work out here back then in the very beginning, so I went there. And so then, I get calls, and several city officials came to the Church Street series and like, well, why don't you do that here? And I said, well, I tried several times and it just didn't work out. Well, we'll work it out. And after talking about this about 2 or 3 years, we finally came to an agreement. I said, well, if you can pave the way to come up with the money to do this, then fine. So between the Downtown Hampton Development Partnership and Mary Frazier at the Hampton
CVB.
Business Convention Bureau, the funding was made available to have these concerts. And so the other question was, well, how much are you going to charge for admission? Because we have to walk you through all of that. And I'm like, how about this? How about I just take the money and throw some concerts for free to bring life back to downtown Hampton? And as my way of saying thank you to everybody who supported not only smooth jazz here, the Norfolk Waterfront Jazz Festival, Jazz Legacy, the Brothers Jazz Series, the stuff that Jay Sennett does, all of the jazz, little small places and artists that are playing that really don't get any notoriety. Thank you, everybody, for supporting this, for supporting the radio station, for supporting it and coming and buying tickets. How about I give you something free and you just bring your chairs and come out here and enjoy world-class artists for free? And so that's why we did these three concerts, which is a precursor to a 6-concert series next year that'll run the first Saturday of every month, May, June, July, August, September, and October. And so I figured, okay, I can marry the two. I can use Hampton to promote what's going on with Church Street during the summer, and then in the winter, use Church Street to promote what's going on here in Hampton.
Yep.
And Hampton has the most beautiful waterfront. We do concerts right here, and there's so much going on in downtown Hampton. With building and Amazon coming to Hampton and so many other corporations and NASA being here. It's just it just made sense to bring some life here. There was a transformation of Granby Street. You remember back in the day, Granby Street was like a ghost town.
Yep.
There were a bunch of shops that were closed, and it just really looked pretty bad.
1980s.
But now, it's hustling and bustling. Same thing with Virginia Beach.
Yeah.
And I live 3 minutes from here. Actually, if you ride up this channel, you can see my house right on the right side up there.
Okay.
And so I had a personal aching in my heart to have something here where I live. Why do I have to go somewhere else to do what we can do here?
Sure.
And we can do both.
Yeah.
And so the whole idea behind this series was to bring some life back down. The first one we had was the biggest crowd we've had here. We had 400 people to show up with their backpack chairs, and Bull Island was open.
Yep.
This restaurant was open, and people had food and drink, and they enjoyed some great entertainment. And so it's just, the purpose is to, of course, Hampton was the home of the Hampton Jazz Festival. It was a cool jazz festival back in the day. Miles Davis was on the first one. And so the real big jazz shows, they all started here.
That's right.
So let's come full circle. Let's bring them back.
Yeah.
And so the mayor, the vice mayor, the city council members, and the whole city and everybody is around it and supporting it. And I look for a great voyage, man, a fantastic journey as we go further with this.
Now, traditional performing arts seasons with the arts groups tend to start in September and go through May or June. So with Church Street Jazz Series, are you going to be announcing a season lineup to begin in September, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I don't have the contract, so I'm not going to say yet.
Sure.
But I'm going to make that announcement at the Bob James concert.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to announce the new series, which taking it to another level, because a couple of the concerts have multiple #1 artists playing together.
Okay.
So you're going to get like one or two major artists playing together, both playing each other's stuff, and they're actually on tour. So I've got that, and then some other artists. Now there.
Is that a concept you put together?
Well, the packages have been out there, and I have been a little leery because they're a little more expensive. And as sad as it is, you'd be surprised at how many people have lived here all their lives and they've never been to the Attic Theater. They've never been to the Harrison Opera House.
Right.
And they're born and raised here.
It's right here.
And have never been here, but they'll go to Blues Alley, they'll go to New York, they'll go all over, they'll go to jazz festivals all around the world to see what they can see right here.
Right.
So it's not as easy as it's as thought to fill seats in those venues, because we're still building and repairing
Sure.
what was damage done by outside promoters coming in, which is one of the reasons why my relationship started with 7 Venues, because Rob Henson and John Ramstein said we need somebody who's our guy. We need somebody who has this area at heart that we can depend on being consistent and not just coming in to make a quick buck and leaving us.
Right.
And being consistent.
Yeah.
And so that guy just happened to be me. Thank God for that. And we have a great relationship, and I've learned so much from the two of them. They have unsurmountable experience at doing this, and they've taught me so much as far as how to do this the right way. So it still hasn't gotten to the point where if you're in Los Angeles or New York and you put Bob James on sale, it'll sell out in a couple of days or weeks.
Yeah.
And people will get the tickets right away. But of course you have 100 maybe different places where you can go see artists. It's New York City.
Sure.
You know, so the real jazz aficionados, they're going to suck up those tickets because he doesn't do concerts that often.
Right.
Here, I've got Bob James, and I have some people saying, well, I'm not too familiar with him. You know, or either I'm not really into his music. Have you ever seen him? No. You know, so it's a re-education of
Sure.
people to what you initially talked about, jazz in its different flavors.
Yeah.
And once they come to a concert, I always go in the lobby to greet everyone and say thank you. Just thank you for coming. And I listen to them. And I said, well, have you been here before? No, I've never been here. And this is so great because it's not just a band and some blue or white can lights on stage. We do the HD screen with the movies in the background and the raindrops and the wind blowing and all that kind of thing to create a kind of Cirque du Soleil type visual and audio production to go along with the performance.
Sure. It's important.
And it's a dance.
Yeah.
It's a ballet.
Unless you're in a little bar.
Right. It's a ballet.
Yeah.
It's a ballet.
All right, Jay Lang, thank you very much.
Thank you.